Hello, everybody. Thank you for tuning into the Liberty Report. Co-host today, Daniel McAdams, is with me. Daniel, good to see you.
Good morning, Dr. Paul.
Oh, very good. We had Eric Margulies was scheduled to come on to our show today, and so far we haven't heard from him. But we're still going to talk about a special article that he has written. Sure. And as you recall, Eric came to our office on several occasions because we consider him a real expert on the Middle East. And one of the books that impressed me a whole lot was his American Raj. And this talks about the American presence. And Raj, of course, means involvement in empire, and it's a takeoff from the British Raj, and with the British involvement in India. So this is a fascinating book. And his experience has been pretty significant. It's not like he's a rocking chair pundit. It looks like he has done some things that a lot of other reporters and authors have not done.
Yeah, Eric has covered 14 wars, and he's been around. As a matter of fact, his article previous to the one that we're discussing today was an amazing tale of how he had spent an evening with Muammar Gaddafi in his tent in Libya. So he's one of those rare reporters that goes to these places, meets with these people, interacts with these people, and finds out what's really going on. And that's why it caught our attention when he wrote a recent article suggesting that ISIS was in fact a paper tiger rather than the all-encompassing monster that it's made out to be.
Yeah, and that certainly is a challenge. He's challenging the status quo. Matter of fact, he even challenges me in a way on the conventional wisdom because as much as I understand, as I believe fairly well about how ISIS is a consequence of our foreign policy, but he goes this one step further, that it's literally a creation. And one analogy was, the Mujahideen, how we supported the Mujahideen and the radicalization of the radicals in Saudi Arabia, and then it's come back to haunt us. But even the individuals that created that aren't bashful about it. They were very proud of it because they said that ended communism and broke up the Russian Empire, the Soviet Empire. But this is a little bit more challenging because it's a current event, and everybody has to take a stand in politics, almost everybody, and saying, these people are really, really bad. And I'm sure there are some really, really bad people in there. But of course, if you lose your family members from a drone missile out of the sky from some government 6,000 miles away, sometimes they think that's almost like terrorism, that happening. But this is interesting. He really makes the case in this article that it's a paper tiger. And then, of course, some of the questions that we struggle with, and Eric would probably be able to help us out on, if that is the case, why are policies this way? And this is always the thing to struggle with. Are they stupid or they do it deliberately, to cause chaos? Is chaos one of their advantages? And sometimes I go back and forth on that.
Yeah, one of the things that Eric, claims in the piece, and it is very interesting and it is very challenging, that, the average ISIS fighter is just a ragtag group of people, ne'er-do-wells, anarchists, he calls them, just a bunch of bad thugs, and they're being led by people who had been high-ranking military officers in Saddam Hussein's military. And so they're the ones with the military experience, and they're trying to, use these kids, these crazy kids, as a fighting force. He goes even further than that, though, and suggests that, as you say, and as we've said in a previous show, that this group is useful to the U.S. and its allies. Don't forget its allies, Qatar, Saudi Arabia, the Gulf states, used by the U.S. and its allies as a way of overthrowing Assad in Syria, much the same way we used the Mujahideen in Afghanistan to overthrow the Soviet-backed government.
Yeah, and his point is that Mosul is sort of a fiction, that it's been bragged about and emphasized, and everybody's anticipating like it's the greatest battle of World War II, and he's saying that is not the case. But it may well be a combination our stupidity, making bad policy, unintended consequences, and the idea that we can go over there and be in charge of the military and do the dirt, have somebody else do the dirty work, and not have Americans killed. But even currently today, we understand that we're losing some troops in Afghanistan. So it never stops. But the other question is, will this strategy work? Because the Iraqi elite guard that we've trained and spent millions of dollars on.
Billions,
yeah, billions. Okay. I don't think anybody knows, are they really a fighting force? And, of course, the big thing, and Margulies recognizes this, what's going to happen afterwards? I mean, they've been wondering about that. Remember when they were talking about the war, and even early on when it started to go poorly, what's your exit strategy? Nobody ever had an exit strategy. Well, here he's even suggested on this very battle for Mosul, and that the Turks might want to be interested in what's going to happen in Mosul. And for a reason, I don't believe the elite guard, which is part of the old Saddam Hussein guard. I don't think they're going to be kingpin in this area. I mean, you have Kurds there, you have Turks there, you have Shiite there, you have American government, you have British government, and so even if this is a fictitious war, so to speak, that there's really no battle there, and we have the military power to take over, I don't think we have the wisdom, which has been obvious for 15 years, the wisdom of knowing what to do with the country after we bomb it to smithereens.
And it's a good point. Can you imagine, the Kurdish Peshmerga militias are crucial to this fight in Mosul. Well, does anyone think that if this battle is won and Mosul is liberated from ISIS, the Peshmerga are going to say, okay, guys, that was great. We're going to go back to Kurdish lands and we'll see you later. And everyone's just going to go and they're going to allow it to be ruled by Baghdad. No one ever talks about what comes next. But, one of the things that Eric points out, and one of the things he uses as evidence that the U.S. Elites know that it's a paper tiger, is what he calls the faux Western war on ISIS. And he talks about the leisurely pace of the U.S. strikes against ISIS in Syria. And he offers that as proof, or certainly as evidence, that the U.S. doesn't take it as seriously as its rhetoric would have us believe, the greatest mortal threat in history.
Well, from his writings, and even in this article, he alludes to the possibility of the deep state. Who really runs this thing? And I was anxious to get him to expand on that a little bit, because that always is fascinating. Who is the deep state, and how many groups are involved, and who does the directing of this? And it looks like sometimes they don't have a precise plan, but other times, what if chaos is their plan? And there are some people who literally believe this. Out of chaos, they set the stage for certain groups to win. And certainly this war going on in the Middle East, which I date back to 1991, we've been involved, and certainly since 2003 going into Iraq, that nobody knows exactly what the goal is. The one goal is to pump up the American people for support. But fortunately, right now, and we went over some statistics recently, the statistics aren't there anymore of the American people jumping up and down. And that may be the reason why the candidates are avoiding it, because, they want to be strong military, but don't use them and this sort of thing. So they're not very interested in dealing with this. And, on a scheme of things, what happens maybe in Aleppo and Syria and what's happening there could be many-fold greater than what's happening next Tuesday on the election. I mean, that's a big deal. There's no doubt about it. But really, is it as big as what the deep state is planning for us, whether it's financial plannings, the bailouts, the Federal Reserve System, foreign policy? How long will they keep building weapons? There's continuously, we hear articles and read articles about weapons that they build and they just either cancel them, or they build them and then they can't use them. This sort of thing. Sometimes it's almost a blessing to go a ways and then cancel it, But no, sometimes like the F-35, they never cancel it.
Yeah.
They didn't cancel the building of the aircraft carrier. They go to the point where we have a neat aircraft carrier now, which is an ancient weapon in this day and age, and they keep going on. But it seems like the directions are there, and I imagine there are sometimes when they think chaos is great, and sometimes they think that we should try to calm things down, and we still have to appease the American public. We have to gear them up when we have to go to war, and we have to satisfy them when they get worried about things. So they have to work closely with the media. The media is big in the news today about how the media participates in our election.
Yeah.
But what about how the media participate in manipulating the public impression, the public understanding of why we're involved or not being concerned about what's going on here in the Middle East?
Of course, the media does the bidding of government officials, and I think in a way maybe the U.S. government now is a victim of its own propaganda, because in order to get the Americans, I think, to get on board with sending troops into Syria, they had to portray ISIS as the worst threat to the United States in history, and you remember back in that August when they were ready to do it, constant scare stories. The media dutifully reported horrible stories of beheadings, constant every day in the news. And so then they got Americans to say, this is the worst thing ever. We can go in now. And now it's, as Eric points out, it's a leisurely pace. What's happening with the fight. And when the Russians got involved and started attacking not only ISIS but Nusra, which is Al-Qaeda, the U.S. did nothing but sit back and criticize them for doing it. So I think the Americans are now, as you say, starting to wake up to this.
And yet the media has been pretty successful in terrorizing the American people about ISIS. It's still pretty high on the list of concerns of terrorist attacks in this country.
Yeah.
I mean, they're around the world, and I think as long as we're there, there's going to be a lot of that activity. But since 9/11, since that event occurred, and you look at it, it's less than 100 people, I think, have been killed by a terrorist attack on this soil. So it's something, though, that people, it's beaten into them so that they keep, you can take the position, well, yeah, I think we're over there too much, but we got to spend a lot more money on the military because, we always have to worry about ISIS coming here. So that is very, very real. And I imagine Eric Margolis would agree that there's a lot of hype about the danger. If he doesn't even think that they're the danger that they claim to be in Mosul, what would he think about this? That he would probably agree that this is a lot of hype itself.
Yeah. And you mentioned Afghanistan earlier, and it is big news today. The two U.S. service members were killed in a firefight in the Kunduz province. But what else is interesting is, first of all, that's a pretty high profile, having two Americans killed because they were on an advise and assist mission. They weren't technically in combat. But when they came under fire, they called in an airstrike, and the U.S. military came and delivered the airstrikes and killed apparently up to 100 civilians in these airstrikes. So you talk about the double standards of Washington going crazy over Russia trying to liberate Aleppo from Al-Qaeda's rule. But then here we go, and remember it was last year in Kunduz province where the U.S. blew up the hospital and killed, I think, 42 people. So it's always collateral damage when we do it, and it's always intentional.
Change the word and call it collateral damage, and that's just what can happen. No, it's a consequence of the foreign policy that we've had. There's not going to be a whole lot of change on this in the near future because I believe that the special interests, whether it's the military-industrial complex, they always have to have a reason, but there's special friends that we have in the Middle East that we always have to take the position of defending them, whether it's Israel or Saudi Arabia or whatever. There's no way that is ever going to change and say that maybe the whole world, including those countries, would be better off if they assume the responsibility for themselves rather than always getting drawn in to some of the mischief that we create. So if we create enough disruption over there, our so-called close allies, they can become vulnerable too because we might not always be the military giant. What happens, if ISIS is a paper tiger? The big question is, could it be possible that the American military could become a paper tiger? Could we become a paper tiger? And of course, that's what happens to all empires. Yeah. So I would suggest that that's what they ought to be concerned about.
And the one thing we could be optimistic about is what we talked about Tuesday, which is that the American people are coming our way. They are becoming more and more fed up with interventionism, and so I think it makes us inspired, but we want to redouble our efforts.
There's no doubt about that. That is good news, and the good news also is that individuals who do vote, as a general rule, tend to look to the individual that's opening the door to peace. In spite of all the strong rhetoric and all the need for the military and all, people still are drawn to a message of peace. And this to me, of course, is very important. The biggest problem, though, and we mentioned this the other day on looking at that poll, is the fact that we have a lot of candidates over the years, and we mentioned the peace candidate, Obama, Nobel Peace Prize, then also even the election of year 2000, the Republican candidate Bush. He had a great foreign policy of non-intervention, no nation building, and minding our own business. So what they say is one thing, what happens the other thing. But once again, they say one thing, they pacify the American people to some degree, and then what they do is they are ruled by the deep state, and that is the reason why if we ever want to change things, we have to totally expose the deep state, the people who really pull the strings behind the scenes, because the more and more I understand and read about this, this is the group, the real enemy of liberty in this country. It's not the Arabs and the Muslims coming from far away and destroying our liberties. It's our very own government, ruled and controlled by a lot of individuals that very few people know about. I hope we participate in a very positive way to expose what is happening here and that the people will know the truth. I want to thank everybody for tuning in today to the Liberty Report. Please come back soon.